layer of communication. And even if we go into digital communication, we actually talk about layers. There's kind of like the train, your seat, the conductor. You can almost look at digital communication as like riding a train. So it does tie in some ways. And then there's some ways that it's kind of completely at a different level, which got me into the meta strategies of healing.
Yeah, and could you maybe elaborate a little bit? You said there's a counterintuitive approach. Could you expand a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if you look at how most of us were raised, and we believe you get sick, if it's bad enough, you go to the doctor. If it's not bad enough, maybe you take an aspirin, or you take this, or you spray something on it if you cut yourself. And, there's some validity to that, but it's kind of this very simplistic way of looking at health. And what we're starting to see more with, all the craziness of the last few years is there's a approach to healing that's called terrain theory, or which is basically contextual. So if you look at, like, just imagine you're a typical family, mom, dad, a couple of kids, and say maybe dad works too much, drinks a little bit too much, mom's always stressed out and anxious, and Junior's hanging out with some bad kids at school, and Susie's all upset because she didn't make the cheerleading team, and then the family's just having a lot of trouble, just, typical, right? So is there a pill for that? What's the magic pill, right? Is it going to fix that? No, it's you start working on the context. Well, maybe we're going to have at least 4 meals a week together. We're going to have at least one family outing every weekend. We're going to have mom and dad are going to have a date night at least twice a month. You can just start working on how do we talk to each other? How do we, what can we work on in little ways? And then over time, that starts to shift everything in a big way. So that's really what we're talking about with terrain theory, and a simple terminology is what's the context? What's the toxicity? What's the exposure to EMF? How well am I sleeping? What am I eating? What is my environment about? What sort of people am I around? What's my pressures at work? All these things. And really start consciously looking at how can I just improve one of these things, the most immediate one. One of the examples I like to give is, you probably run across people, right? And they have something going on and they go to the doctor and they're like, well, they don't know what I have, but they're running tests, and so they go back. I'm supposed to go back in a month, and they ran some more tests. They still don't know what I have. And then people get more and more upset and worried. And, 6 months later, they still don't know what I have. And finally, I go and they say, well, you got Lagabadugu, right? And it's like, oh, what is that? Well, we don't have a cure for it, right? So, and you're all freaked out. Well, what if while you're getting your tests made, and I'm not encouraging anybody to avoid that, I think it's wise to use the advanced technologies we have, but what if you started looking, instead of the magic pill, I say if you envision the white magic pill on a black table, for instance, and take a photo negative of that for you, for us older people that know what a photo negative is, what would it look like? It'd be like a black pothole on a white table. So what if instead of the magic pill, I look for the next pothole on my path? And that might be, I really need to lose some weight, but I love Mountain Dew, or I love, sodas. Well, what if I could find a way to get that out of my diet? Maybe drink kombucha, or maybe do some tapping or some hypnosis or whatever to get that craving gone. Because I clearly know that drinking sodas is not conducive to weight loss. And if I solve that one, fill in that one pothole, I keep going to the next one. I really should get more sleep. I like to stay up and watch these old movies, and, I end up tired every day, and I know I just need more sleep. So how can I fix that? And I just keep filling in each pothole. And maybe by the time the 6 months comes around, the condition's just cleared up, and who knows what caused it. But I didn't have to know everything. I don't have to be a genius. I just have to look for contradictions. And again, that's Sherlock Holmes, right? The dog didn't bark, right? How would you think that a clue, right? But it's genius. What are contradictions? What are clues that maybe I'm just blind to if I look in a linear way? So hopefully that's a good example.
No, that is a really good example. And so when you're talking the counterintuitive and kind of finding those potholes, um, how does Solera Gem Crystal Fusion Light find those potholes?
Well, what the Solara Gem does is more, it's really like a way to meditate, for instance. If you tried meditation, that can be really hard because, your mind just like, people get frustrated. You sit quietly and get your mind to calm down. And there's different techniques for it. But what the Solar Gym will do is it will pretty much entrain your brain into a very relaxed state within a few minutes. And there's one of my people I've run across recently named Sherry Anshara, who's an energy healer in Phoenix. And she's 81 and she's a little 5 foot tall, like a comedian. She's just hilarious, kind of irreverent. But the work she does is just incredible. And what she describes is the way she describes it is that our cells are genius. Your nose cell knows it's supposed to be a nose cell. Your ear cell knows it's supposed to be an ear cell. It knows that. I don't have to tell it that. But we have a computer in our left brain that's like a 286. If you go back that far, that was the pre-Windows, very slow DOS-based system. And that computer is programmed by our family, our society, all the stuff we learned growing up. And she calls that, cellular memorization, whereas the cells have cellular memory. They know what they're supposed to be. But this computer brain overrides the natural intelligence of the body with all this programming. And what we want to do is just calm this part down, kind of like if you're taking a nice ride on a pretty day, a Sunday drive through a beautiful nature, and there's a backseat driver that just won't shut up, right? And oh, she would shut up and let the guy drive the car or whatever. And finally, that person just goes to sleep. And like, finally, we can just enjoy the ride. And that's kind of when we get this to go to sleep and chill out, everything else, the body's like, oh, thank you. I know where that needs to go. It's remarkable because I work with pain and stress and all sorts of things. And the body knows what to do. We try to outthink it. And that's not how we work. Our body's smarter than we are, or we wouldn't last very long.
Right, and this is something that actually is coming to the forefront more and more. I guess ever since I guess the pandemic, right? People are being more in tune with different things and different ways of looking at things, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we just see what an absolute disaster this whole thing was. And, I think from a big picture standpoint, we live in such a machine world, right? Almost you can't even get anybody on the phone anymore. You're talking, and if you do, they're in another country and barely speak English. And it's just everything is automated, everything, and there's just no humanity in it because the machine is just a machine. Now, it's great in one way because we can mass produce stuff that we would never have without having factories and automation. So we have a lot of nice things because of it. But it's really hard because, you try to call somebody because Amazon screwed up your order or something, and the person's pretty helpless, right? They can read a checklist of things to tell you, but if it involves anything out of their bandwidth, they just feel helpless. And we see that we have all these little functionary people that are, I mean, I thought it was just absurd on many levels because being in the holistic health field, I could see it's just a way overreaction. You're shutting down everybody's livelihood for even what the CDC admits is a cold, and maybe there was other stuff going on, but people just freaked out because they have no idea how our bodies work. And they're scared to death over a little germ, but, they don't talk about it. I thought it was funny because I went to Las Vegas kind of during that time, and they weren't pushing it, but they're like, would you like a mask? And I thought, no, this is almost ridiculous. That Las Vegas, which you could probably do anything under the sun, unhealthy, disgusting, whatever, and they're worried about me wearing a mask. And this is so absurd, this whole thing. But it's because our thinking is so off. And, you had people screaming at you to put a mask on in the grocery store. And yet I have 2 cats and they lick each other's bottoms all the time. And, they're eating stuff off the floor and they're not dying of every little germ. I mean, it's so absurd but everybody's just so caught up in it. And your job is, you're such a little cog that has no power. Like if I lose this job, I really don't know how to do anything useful, like grow food or survive in the winter. So the fear is amplified, right? And I better do what they tell me, or I'll be out in the street, and then you got maybe a spouse or something that's really freaking out, even if you know better. And so these things can start, or your family, you don't want you to come for Thanksgiving because they're freaked out because they grew up watching, TV shows in the 70s that told you doctors were, godlike and all this. And so it's pretty, becomes kind of crazy.
Actually, just on that, on that topic of the doctors, there's a lot of things in the medical field that have confused me. And I've done this. I've asked multiple people on the show and off the show as well about how medicine evolves, and how they're not allowed to talk about uh, this stuff. They're starting to sort of somewhat integrate some of it now. But I mean, that what I go back to is, and I don't do this from a place of judgment, but um, just a place of observation. So 1950s, all doctors smoke Camels.
Right.
1960, 1970, there might be something here. I mean, they're not necessarily healthy for you, but they're okay. 1980, 1990, we're probably giving you cancer. 1998, Surgeon General, yeah, we are. Sorry, our bad. So it just goes to show we have a lot to learn for sure.
Well, if you know the story of, was it Semmelweis back in the, I don't know, 1700s, 1600s, that figured out that you should wash your hands between delivering babies, and was really driven mad and just ridiculed by the whole medical establishment. Uh, hey, it's a good idea to wash your hands. You're causing deaths because you're spreading bacteria and all this stuff from one woman to the next. And I bet if you ask any doctor, they say, "Oh yeah, we know of Semmelweis, blah blah." But to me, there should be, because of human nature, and we can go deeper into that because human nature's, when you really understand how we work, it really explains this. But you would think, we have this Hippocratic oath that the doctors are supposed to say. You'd think they would have, kind of like the Roman emperor that had the slave to tell him, "Beware of the Persians" or whatever. We would have something that doctors beware of attacking Semmelweis. This would remind me to keep an open mind and not to be, and yet just as bad. That we think we're any better than those people? Absolutely not. And it's human nature. And these doctors are in an impossible situation too, because their life is run by numbers, and you're in Canada, I guess, so you have more of this socialized medicine. So maybe it's the government. We just have insurance companies that are doing the same thing, telling the doctors what they can and can't do, and they're scared and they're deeply in debt, and they're, all these issues. And so it's a real problem. And then we've just kind of created this house of cards of this mechanical world that I think the more we can learn to be agile and learn to see it for what it is and not fear it and not see it as, I just don't want to know, it's too scary. What we really need to do is to be able to see things as they are. And what I want to talk about is there's a method we can do that. And it's really powerful. And so we'll get into that. But I think we want to be able to openly see everything as honestly as possible. Just like an alcoholic, until they admit they're an alcoholic, they're not going to get better. We're not going to solve this till we can at least look at it and say, man, this is screwed up, but I don't have to blame you or blame the doctor or blame, whoever. I can just see it honestly and have a method to dig into how do we start fixing it, or how do I protect myself from it, or whatever I can do at whatever level. And so I think that's kind of, in a sense, ties into procrastination, but it's a whole different counterintuitive way of going about it versus just trying to memorize or create a bunch of habits to add on to all the other things that got to keep up with.
No, and I'm glad that you said that too, because one of the things that is interesting to me is that you know now we're talking more about prevention. So there's diet, exercise, um, not getting a lot of screen time. What else? Taking all your vitamins, but we don't really talk about um, energetically. I'm going to let you take over there because I'm honestly, I know a little bit. I've dug into it, but you are the expert. Let us know what's going on there, and what we can do.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I don't know that I'm an expert, but I think a way to look at subtle energy, and more people are at least heard of it. They've heard of Reiki or things that what's energy, and it's kind of a broad term because energy means a lot of things, right? Petroleum, electricity, all these things. But a simple way to think of subtle energy would be like, let's say somebody in your circle is really sick, right? They're having some challenges, chronic illness. So the doctor might say, well, okay, I can see your arteries clogged here, or we can see your bones broken, or we can see that you got arthritic buildup in your wrist. But there's a thing called subtle energy, which is how the emotions and the feelings and the memories all tie in. It would be equivalent to if you're having an issue. Um, if we looked at your family dynamics, for instance, and said, well, what's going on in his family now? Maybe there's a lot of pressure there. Maybe there's some tragedy. Maybe there's some sadness. Maybe there's a kid that's in trouble. All this stuff is going to be weighing on you, right? It's going to be really affecting you. But you go to the doctor and they're just taking measurements and they're not asking you about that stuff unless they're really advanced. And I have heard that that's being written in their textbooks now, that the next generations of doctors, but who goes back and reads a textbook once you're out of school? You think your doctor's any better at that? No, they're just doing, their thing. But what we call subtle energy are the things that aren't seen that are still contributing to the problem. So to me, that's just a simple way to look at it. There's more to this. If we all just came out of a pristine, sterling environment with a perfect wife and the perfect children and the paradisical home and no stress, then we could say, okay, well, let me just figure out mechanically what's going on. But how many of us live in that world? No. And it's important when we're supporting those in our family and our loved ones who are going through something to understand there's a lot more at play. And this is the world I'm dealing with the Solarigem, because that's getting into that realm. But most people aren't even aware of who they are, what we call being objective or subjectivity. Are you an object or a subject? And there's a whole universe inside of each of us that nobody else sees. And that's a bigger world than the world outside of us, which we know almost nothing about, because very few of us really get to see much of it. It's impossible compared to one person to really, we see TV and we see what people tell us, and it's, not usually close to accurate, whether it's our friends or the TV or anything. It's just their limited perspective trying to interpret it, whether they're trying to mislead us or not. And so there's so much more to our internal world that usually we don't even begin to become aware of until a certain stage of life, when usually tragedy or something transformational forces us to look at it.
Well, you know what they say. There was a really good example on Instagram. I thought I was a genius because I thought I was the first one to think about it, and then somebody told me, "Oh no, I saw that on Instagram." Wait, so I'm not on Instagram, but anyway, they said, "Yeah, you don't look internally because the pressure's too great, and if you need to see how that manifests in the real world, if you don't believe it, we sent a man 235,000 kilometers to the moon, and that was easier." Than going what 50 kilometers down into the ocean, because
Right.
the pressure's too great. So it's very interesting how that played out as well. When you're talking about seeing internally, and we all know this, that we're creatures of comfort, and we don't tend to look into things that are uncomfortable. So do you think that that's why, as just generally as we get older, we're just more used to being uncomfortable, and then we're okay with looking at that? Or do you think it always has to be some catalyst, like some tragedy or loss?
Well, let me give a brief history of my understanding of how we actually work. And so one of the beautiful things, and I'll give a reference to everybody, and a lot of this I've learned from a guy named David Mills, who rediscovered the method for knowing what's true. And I was fortunate to have stumbled into a SEO training he put on several years ago to learn how to do search engine optimization for websites. But his real ulterior goal was to get people to really look at this method he calls the law of implication. And if you've heard of the law of attraction, Most people have heard of that. You think what you think about comes to you. Well, that's not, it's kind of an oversimplified thing. It's not quite true. But there's some value to it, and there's some truth to it. But what he got into was, he calls it the law of implication. And it is based on Sherlock Holmes, and it's based on, and his question was, can you point to the time in your life where you sat down and either discovered or learned or figured out the method for knowing what is true? If you can't point to that time, then where does your method come from? Right? Who even thinks of that, right? We just assume we know it because, so I've spent years kind of learning from what he's put together there. And the beautiful thing is that it's self-proving. Like, even the scientific method doesn't prove itself, but the law of implication method does. And I'll demonstrate it here in a minute, because it's really simple. The problem is really with us and our habits. But it's a method for breaking those habits. And so let me just give you my kind of quick story of how life works from a meta level. And again, it may be right or wrong. It's just an analogy. So if you got arguments with it, that's great. But I'm not trying to preach it as this is the gospel or anything. But let me ask you a question. And it's funny how many Southerners and Texans don't even know this. But do you know why a rifle is called a rifle?
You know, that is one bit I do not believe I have.
Don't feel bad. Most people don't. A rifle is called a rifle because the inside of the barrel has a corkscrew engraved in it. That's called rifling. And do you know why it's rifled?
Well, it's to keep it, when you have the spin on it, the trajectory stays straighter than if it just came out straight. Yeah.
Exactly. So you know more than most people. Most people don't know that one either. So exactly right. And if you watch football, you have laces on the football. So again, the quarterback spins it straight. If you watch baseball, you know that a knuckleball, you try not to spin the ball by making it not spin so it won't go straight. So if you look at life, and it's a beautiful question, because if you really look at life from the standpoint as a question and a problem, is how would God have to make us if we're God's children? And we can prove whether God exists or not. And I'm not trying to preach to anybody, but you can actually prove with this method, does God exist and what's the nature of God? But if you just take as a hypothetical God, if he were going to create children, how would he have to do it? Assuming not like a lot of old school, he's going to whack us and send us to hell if we screw up. It's kind of like this. If you were a father like that, you'd probably go to prison, right? If you treated your people the way most people tend to think God's going to treat us. It's like, no, he'd be a horrible parent. I think he'd be the best parent ever, because he created the concept of being a parent. And what parent doesn't want their children to be everything they are and more? So just taking that very simple thing, and I'm not a parent, so I'm even more qualified because I'm a bachelor. But as you know, bachelors know everything, right? But when it comes to things they haven't done. But if you just take that problem, it's really interesting, because he couldn't just make us a robot, right? Because he has all this freedom and ability to create and do all this stuff. So how would he make us like him? And it's a fun question to think about. But I think what happens is we have to start out as kind of a robot in a sense. We are shot out of a gun into life. So when you showed up at birth, the world couldn't stop, right? Your parents couldn't just quit their jobs, quit everything else, and just spend 24/7 with you. They did absolute as much as they could, brought in their parents or their friends or, whoever, if you had older siblings, and they're just struggling, right? Because it's a lot of trouble to keep a child up. But we're designed to soak up everything. Doesn't matter how good our parents were, how bad, how our society. That's the rifling, that conditioning, because we just have no filter at all. Right? Your kids learn all the words you don't want them to say because they hear you say them, right? And that's really the only way it could work, Because how tedious would it be if you had to say, okay, sweetie, here's how you move this finger, and here's how you move this finger. And, and if you think of a puppy or a child, right, you don't teach them to play really. You just kind of give them a safe area where they won't tear up anything or hurt themselves, and give them a few toys, and they just play, throw them, chew on them, whatever. And they're kind of learning on their own. And it's kind of remarkable. We take this start, which is like us getting shot into life. And then at some point in life, we start seeing contradictions. Wait, this isn't how mama told me it was. This isn't what the preacher said. This isn't what the teacher said. And we have a choice. Do I trust my own seeing, or do I just clamp down and stick to my conditioning and become kind of a literalist or fundamentalist of whatever stripe? And they're fundamentalists aren't all religious. They're of all stripes, because to me, it's just, can we break out of this conditioning and become an individual? Or do we just stay with that conditioning? And a lot of the reasons for that are going to be how much trauma we've suffered, how much margin we have to take risks and all. So I'm not faulting anybody. I mean, I think this conditioning is not, this is the mind we were talking about, the 286. It's an amazing tool for learning and keeping us safe and keeping us going. And we need that, because if we had to stay conscious all the time, we would be dead long ago. I mean, how many times you've driven your car and you realize, I just went 10 miles. I have no idea where that time went. So we pretty much just teeter on unconscious. So this robot that is us for the most part, in many ways, is absolutely necessary. But we want to grow out of it. And if you put this in terms of the Bible, and again, I'm not preaching, but I love the Bible. If you really start looking at it more from this standpoint, to me, that's the Christ moment. Christ was born in a manger, because it wasn't really important, right? There's a manger out there. You can have him out there. Our first moment of trusting our own awareness and start seeing, whoa, I've got to make my own decisions. I can't just rely on this conditioning. This ain't working. I got to do something. It's pretty scary. I mean, that's the Christ moment. That's the Christ is born, when we become an individual and have to make our own way in the world, or not. And it's also like breaking out of the eggshell, like a bird has to break its way out from the inside. Mama doesn't break it from the outside. So I don't know. Is this making sense? I don't want to keep rattling on. It's not.
No, it definitely makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. Yep, that is. So that's the way that it kind of goes. And so how does that tie in then into what you do, the next level, so to speak?
So the big challenge with what I do is I find that people don't really know what they want. Okay, so I look at it as most of us are driving the Indy 500 in life. We're just running in circles with everybody else. And that's kind of how life is, right? Especially in the modern world, right? It's just you're pushing, get out of school, get whatever, get a job, get married, get kids, and you're just huffing it, and you're just going as fast as you can, and you're just following the road, just to keep things going. But then you get an accident, or your elbow hurts, or you got a stomach ache or something. You take a pit stop. You're like, fix it, doctor, fix it. I got to get back on the road. Where are you going? I'm just going, right? And so as we get older and as we have more complex issues, chronic issues, if take chronic pain, for instance, arthritis, all these things, pain is important. If I cut myself or a tooth breaks, hey, fix this tooth. You just broke this tooth. It's going to get infected. But if it's still hurting like 2 years later, or I've got arthritis, why is it still hurting? I know there's a problem with my wrist. I've had time to address it. Why does it still hurt? Because it's tied in to memories and emotions. And it's a tougher connection. It's not just a physical. And we tend to look at ourselves as robots still, as mechanical beings, and we're not. And so what I find is when people, in order to really break through these deeper pains, they have to clear emotional trauma. And again, we're built that way. It's brilliant because it's a reminder, like, hey, there's more to life than just running around in circles until you drop dead of a heart attack or till you retire and, you know, whatever. It's like it's constantly the hound of heaven or whatever. It's like saying, hey, there's more to this. You need to look at that. And we don't want to because we're too busy. And so with what I do, it's very counterintuitive because if I take a pill, people are just conditioned to believe a pill works because, you know, it's such embedded memories, you know, from generations after generations. You know, or if they've even done tests on placebo, that if you give somebody a placebo thing and you give them placebo plus a slight amount of pain, not bad pain, but so you feel like something's being done, that these people score higher in placebo because there's a little bit of pain applied. Because again, our mind is a mechanical thing and it constantly misleads us because it's not conscious. It's just a mechanism like this 286 computer. But yet we think we know what the outcome should look like. Our mind has to do a lot of things that actually mislead us all the time. But it's not wrong. It's kind of, it has to work that way. But when you do something like what I'm doing, which is very esoteric because it's not hitting people or shining light in their eyes or pinching them, or it's just like people lay under it and they usually relax. And a lot of times their pain will go away, but they look confused and they don't, it's like they don't really know what they want. Because healing is not fixing. Healing is more you. That's a book I'm working on. Healing is more you. It's what Christ said, I came that they may have life and life more abundant. He didn't just come to heal people. He tried to heal people to show them there's more to this thing than meets the eye. But he could have just healed everybody and gone home, right? But, you know, it's not what he did. He tried to show us there's a bigger thing to life. There's more abundance. There's more. And when we really start to understand who we are and who we're not, and we can start to see the contradictions in our own way of being, we can see it because this is programmed, but it's not conscious. You're conscious, but you don't do anything. You do one thing. And this is hard to get. I didn't just get it the first time I heard it, so don't feel bad. It's extremely counterintuitive. As you go through this process, you can actually figure out things like this, because let's step back a minute and go to goal setting, because you talk a lot about procrastination and goals, and we're in the new year, it's goal time. Well, the problem with goals, and in law of implication, you can go to YouTube, and he's got this free on YouTube. He gives it away, but he has a couple of videos about goals versus vision. A vision is a much better approach than a goal. And among the reasons is a goal relies on me. If it's going to be, it's up to me, right? That's all your self-help is all about. It's up to me, and I got to do it, and I got to, But when everything's about us, we tend to run from things that make us look bad. Or if you're doing say you're setting a business plan, for instance, most business plans are just ridiculous, right? Because they're like, well, we'll design the product in a year, and then we'll do this. And usually it's just like ideals. They don't take into account all the roadblocks that happen. And if your friend comes along and says, well, what if this happens? You're like, oh, come on, man. You're just bringing me down, man. I got to keep this motivation up. Well, it's actually good if somebody says, here's a big potential gotcha. And so we need to get to a place where we're happy to see the gotchas and happy to see the contradictions versus running from them. And that's why I want to get me out of the equation. If it's based on me, then it's just very hard not to want to look good and want to look good to my spouse, my children, my family, you shouldn't go out on your own business. Why don't you get a job? What's going to happen if you don't make, and your family's concerned about you, but there again, gosh, Dad's right. I'm broke here. I'm, 20,000 in debt. You hide that. But if we shift things around to where progress is not about, is my bank account going up? That's good. Is it going down? That's bad. And we yo-yo, it's seeking understanding. If I seek understanding when I go up, then I'll maybe understand how I can do it again. Or when I go down, okay, I better not do that again. That was not a good thing. Or maybe it was a good thing. I just got hit by a really bad wave of luck. You know, the tariffs came in right when I had this big deal lined up with China or whatever. You know, I guess I should pay more attention to the news and what's going on. But if we can really get away from judging ourselves by how good I do, I can always seek understanding and always learn from every situation. And then there's never a setback if I seek understanding. And if I create a vision, the vision doesn't, I don't have to create a new vision because the vision could last my whole life. But a goal, as soon as I achieve it, I have to set another one, right? And another one. So life's this endless. When I was in sales, it was awful. You know, you have this target, we grind all year, and then we either meet it or don't. And then we get a week to go to our sales meeting and then get our new targets, which is higher, and like back to the grind. And it's just this, and this is how most of us live life. And we can break that pattern.
Right. So, and the key difference between setting a goal and having a vision is the vision. You're not really too concerned with the steps it takes to get there. You just know you're going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, you can still look at practical ways, and you can have, you know, goals in a sense, you know, that, well, I know I need to do this in order to buy this new car. I need to, you know, maybe work a couple extra hours every week or save an extra $25 a week and put it away for 6 months till I make a down payment, whatever. But a vision you can live in, and others can share that vision. So you can create a vision of the home environment I want to have, which doesn't, you know, it may mean that I want a real fancy home with all this stuff, but it might just be I want a comfortable home where we feel at peace and we feel we can relax and just talk with each other and not be on pins and needles because I'm trying to live up to something or that. You know, your spouse, your children, your family, your friends can be in your vision, and that vision can last a whole lifetime. And a goal is, you know, one of the other things is the gurus will say, well, if you're not making your goal, you just got to put more resources towards your goal until you achieve it. Well, resource management's a big thing. It's a balance. Maybe I can't afford to keep putting resources. So I need to look at another approach of how do I actually allocate resources, because that's really what life's about, is resource allocation. And so then I want to look at the method, and that method starts with looking for bottlenecks, looking for contradictions, looking for roadblocks. This is the way that we live. And I'll actually give you the method because it's the Sherlock Holmes method, and it's very simple. But let me ask you a question first. Do you believe you can know something is true absolutely?
You know, I've been asking myself that question for quite a while. You know, how do I know what I know is true, and then don't know anything objectively that's true. Like objectively is the thing, right? And I haven't really found anything that I know to be true, except that I don't have a method that seems to be infallible at proving something true objectively.
Right. Because I will show you the method, and I didn't create it. And it's actually, it's one of these things as I learned this, and it took me several years because I had to break a lot of different belief structures and all. But at some point you go, my gosh, this is so obvious. How did I not see it? It's like, it's not channeled from somewhere. It's like, oh gosh, this is so patently simple. So I will show you, I'm going to let you prove to yourself using the method that you can absolutely know if something's true or not. You ready to do that?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the way you know if something is true, the only way you can know something is true is that the opposite cannot be true.
Okay.
And this will tie into the terrain theory and all that we're talking about. But so I'm going to show you the method. Are you, and these are straight, simple questions, they're not Zen koans or anything, because I'm not even sure the best way to ask it, but are you literally conscious or aware of nothing. And I don't mean in a Zen way. I mean, literally, you're like a piece of wood. You're unconscious.
Well,
Of
no.
course not, right? You're clearly conscious. You're carrying on a conversation. You set up this meeting. You do a lot of things. Are you conscious of everything?
Well, no.
Of course not, right? What's Trump having for breakfast, or Trudeau, picking his nose with, or whatever? I have no idea, right? There's a million. So you have a limited conscious awareness. Is that true?
Well, I mean, if it must, well, sounds true, but it's not true.
Well, it has to be true. If you take so one of the other challenges is we don't use words consistently. English, words have multiple meanings, and people are constantly changing the meanings, and we'll say, well, that's not what you mean. Well, maybe it might be what you mean by God, but that's not what I mean by God. Well, we can't even have a conversation if that's true. So when you go to the grocery store and buy a stick of chewing gum or something and give them a loonie, right, and they give you 37 cents back, you don't argue with the clerk and say, well, that might be what you think 37 cents means, but that's not what it means to me. That'd be ridiculous, right? We pretty much all agree that numbers mean what numbers are. Well, why can't words be like that? If we made words that way, then we could actually have real discussions and not just get lost in this morass of, well, what is truth? And, so what I was trying to get across is, if we just say simple awareness, are you aware of something? You're consciously aware of something. Undeniably, you're not aware of nothing. You're not unconscious, and you're not aware of everything. So those are two extremes that I proved are absolutely impossible. So you are something in between. Now, most of us would be barely above not conscious if you figured everything that's going on in the universe, right? But still, it's a lot. It's still a lot. So what's interesting in one is you now know for certain that you can know something is absolutely true, and you proved it to yourself. So one thing that we do, and the Bible says this, don't despise the day of small beginnings, is we need to really value what we have and what we know. That is a foothold. Now, it may seem, okay, that seems kind of trivial, but it's true. That you just broke a very deep philosophical conundrum you've been in for a long time. I may say, well, that's kind of not inspiring. That's, not a chick in a red dress driving a Mustang kind of wow moment, but it's, wow, it's true. So that method you can use for everything. And that is the method for success. The problem is so you must start with what you know, not with what you don't know. And you eliminate what can't be true until you're left with what has to be true. And that's what we just did. You can use that method to find the answer to anything that's knowable. Excuse me, talking too much. Pardon me, I got a frog in my throat. Why don't you give me some feedback? Let me mute for a second and I will clear this.
No, definitely. We, and it's funny when you say like how can we do all that? I mean, that goes this whole discussion about just humanity in general and how we work. And my big question has always been, and nobody's answered this for me yet. My big question has always been, how did we even decide way back when, before language existed? Like, who decided that a tree should be called a tree and a rock should be called a rock and all these other fun things? Because we can't agree on anything right
Well, good question. And so for one, we have to build definitions from the ground up if we're going to be on the same page. The same way, if you're going to walk up a mountain, you don't want to take the second step until that first step is secure, or you're going to slide down the mountain. So we want a foundational starting point that allows us to find out what is true. And so one of the reasons that things like the proofs of God that all these people have tried forever, or these, philosophers, we can't know truth and all this, is that they start with the physical world. The physical world is not foundational, right? I mean, if you go back to basic science, we know that the green plant behind you is mostly nothing, right? It's atoms that are mostly. We know the color green is how the light hits your eyes, goes to your brain, and we don't all see green the same way. So green is not inherent in that plant, and it's mostly nothing. The chair you're in, same thing, right? The texture of that chair has to do with your interface of it. This is what in the science of perception is called naive realism. That things are exactly how they look. Now, in the practically everyday life, of course, we can avoid hitting the chair, knocking the bush over, banging our head on the wall. And so for most of life, it's fine just to believe things are as they are. But kind of like quantum physics shows us, okay, at a certain point, everything breaks down. Our thinking breaks down when we follow naive realism. So what is the foundational starting point? And again, I'm giving you an advanced class, so I don't feel bad. This is like, took me hours and hours to get to this understanding. But I want to kind of whet appetite of anybody that might want to look further. But where you can have a foundational starting point is in your conscious awareness. So if you take an analogy that whatever you're aware of at this instant is on a screen, like a movie screen or a computer screen, and we call it your consciousness screen. This is what David does in his teaching this, showing this, that anything you feel, smell, hear, tummy rumbling, all that stuff is on this consciousness screen. Okay, so I can't tell you that bush does not look green to you on your consciousness screen, right? Because I don't see your I'm not aware of your consciousness screen. Only you are aware of it. And you can absolutely know what something seems like to you on that consciousness screen. And if you really break it down, everything that you experience is on that consciousness screen. Your whole world, your whole existence is experienced on that consciousness screen. And where David said he had a real breakthrough is when he realized we break the world up in the wrong place. We tend to think inner world, outer world, inside of me, outside of me. He goes, no, that's not the right place. It's on my consciousness screen, not on my consciousness screen. So we can actually start at that foundational point, and we can define who you are or who I am. I'll just use you, but it's universal, each of us. You are the person or the being that's aware of your consciousness screen. I'm aware of mine. But that consciousness screen is not all in your head or in your own world, because we both see each other. We see the bush in your background. You see the picture behind me. So there's a lot of commonality. So the consciousness screen is not, or reality is not just, in our heads or in our own solipsistic world. There's something out here, kind of like code, like a computer game would have. But we don't really know what it looks like, right? Because we've proven that with basic science, we can't know what it looks like. So that's why we can't start with the physical world as a foundation point. We start on the consciousness screen. So there's three things that are foundational. There's consciousness screens, conscious beings, and reasons. And reasons is just the simple thing of why your consciousness screen changes. You turn your head. Oh, there's a picture there. There's the kitchen. That's so the reasons would be your physical body, your thoughts, your mind, the laws of physics. All these things are reason why your conscious experience changes.
So kind of like it's kind of like the allegory in the cave, right? I mean, I mean, we're not locked in a cave per se, but we can only see what's on that consciousness screen. We can't really see what's outside of that.
Well, everything that exists for us is on our consciousness screen. It doesn't mean that it's, like I say, it's only in our head. It's just everything out there is like code. Like if you were playing a virtual reality game, and I've never done it, but you can imagine if you put on the little gloves and the mask and the eye thing and the ear thing, you can hear, you could touch a tree, you could play baseball, all sorts of things. And you're just sitting there, but you're feeling the bat on your fingers. You're feeling the sting of when you hit the ball. You're smelling, maybe they even have smell. I guess there's potential they could, but you feel the vibrations. And so life is, in a sense, like a game like that. It's programmed in the sense that there's some sort of code, and we experience as if it's real, and it is real. I mean, we still suffer, we still have people in pain, we still feel joy. So it's not that it's all in your head or those things aren't important. Those are very important, because there's deep suffering in life, there's great joy, there's all things in between. So it's not to minimize any of that, but it helps us to see we can start to break down a lot of things when we have the right method. I'm kind of going to an advanced level, but from that method, from what we just showed, you can actually prove, is there a God, and what's his nature? And again, if you go to the YouTube channel, you can kind of go through that, but you have to kind of understand the method first. But basically, there has to be a programmer. Somebody has to create and uphold your consciousness screen and my consciousness screen and cause it to change based on the reasons. And so that the world, just like a computer game, works by the laws of physics. You hit a baseball, it goes that way instead of 10 feet in the ground. There has to be a programmer that's has a coherent viewpoint. And so you can break this down and go through it in more depth, but it's powerful because it helps us to see that life is abundant when we realize that ultimately that God upholds and creates our conscious experience moment to moment, that nothing moves on its own. And this validates, what Jesus said, if you've done this to the least of these, you've done it to me, because God experiences everything you and I experience. So whatever I do to you, I'm doing to God, because he experiences. And so even the scripture says he's nearer to us than we are to ourselves. He actually upholds our whole experience. And so he's not opposed to us and creating problems for us. He is living with us, everything, suffering everything, feeling every joy every instant. And that's powerful to realize. Wow, when you start looking at the implications of that, then it really opens up so much amazing things, and more questions too. But again, we have a method for answering the questions.
Well, this has been a really great conversation, Mike. We are coming up to the time. Excuse me. Do you believe that there's something I didn't ask that I should have asked, or maybe something we should have covered that we didn't cover today?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
Is there something that you feel maybe we should have covered today that we didn't cover today?
No, I mean, I think, I kind of dove in the deep end with something, but I just really wanted to kind of introduce this methodology for just a different way to look at things, because it really does help with goal setting, and because you can actually take that to a whole nother level and understanding how we work, what goals are for and what they're not, and how to use our stuff to the best of its ability. And because there's nothing wrong with how we're made, it's actually beautiful. Once we understand it, we can use it more effectively. So it's kind of like a deep dive into an endless topic. So I do apologize if that was too much, but
No, it was really great. We really appreciate you being on the show and having that different perspective, because again, that's what it's all about. It's about experience. It's about perspective. It's about just getting as many perspectives as you can, right? To see the collective whole.
yeah, and I see, again, when you have this method, I guess this is where I should add, when you have the right method, then you can make things about how well am I following the method versus is it me? then I can say, oh, well, I didn't follow the method here. No wonder I went off track. Versus, oh, I'm a loser because my bank account went down or the girl left me or whatever. It's, wow, where did I go off track following the method? Then it puts the onus on the method, not on me. And then I can just be objective. Okay, how well am I following the method? Because we're here to learn. We're here to be like your kids. You don't beat them up because they screw up. Hey, they're going to learn. This is what we're all about. So yeah, I guess that's probably the point I should maybe finish with it.
No, I like that point. It's a very good point. Um, just before we go, Mike, what is the best way for our listeners to reach out and get in touch with you in case you want to learn more?
So my website is solaragem.com, which is solaragem.com. And you can also get there through mikebroadwell.com. If you forget how to spell that, just look at my name and do that.com, and that'll go to the same place. But there's a contact field there. My phone number's on there. I work very closely with my people that use the Solaragem and incorporate kind of some of this stuff into the process as much as I can.
Okay. Well, and again, just to all our listeners, don't worry. We will be putting that information in the show notes for you, so you don't have to grab paper and pen or anything like that. Thank you so much, Mike, for being on the show. It's been a real pleasure. And to all our listeners, again, thank you for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go back out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Okay, let's just get this here. 88% uploaded. All right, that's cool.